My name is Richard Freiberg Jones. I am 35 years old. I am a husband and I am a father of 6 children. My wife and children are the most important thing to me in my entire life. And the history and culture of our people, indigenous people, is very important, but it is obscure and harrowingly near to fading from living memory. When I ask myself what I want my children to know, or who I want them to be as people and indigenous people, many answers come to mind. I want them to be virtuous. I want them to be good people. I want them to be happy. Then you have to ask yourself what it means to be virtuous, or what it means to be principled, or how to conduct yourself as a person with a moral code. I took a course at Northwest Indian College that explained to me how a culture is a tribal identity, and that your tribal identity can inform your personal identity because your culture is shaped by the values of your people. I was grateful to learn about my tribal values and specifically explicate the nature of a culture. Growing up, you never quite know what a culture means or what it means to be Native American, but you know that you want to belong to your Native American people. You want to belong to your tribe. I've been able to determine who my people are and were to the best of my ability by reading and listening to our histories, like our treaty history and our most revered oral histories. And those and in those are the values that I want to teach my children. This is important because in this paper I want to talk about what it means to be a Native American today. I want to talk about our treaty in the Pacific Northwest. I want to talk about the identity of my people and how I can convey that to my children to teach them who they are. I have two main important points that I want to cover in this paper, and the first is the perception of indigenous people and the stigmas surrounding them. The reason this is important to me, again, is my children. When I was a child, there were so many stereotypes surrounding indigenous people. For example, my friends in the town nearest to my reservation would ask me ridiculous questions like, do you live in a teepee? Have you ever rode a canoe to school? Have you ever rode a horse to school? Do you know how to read and write? These are obviously ridiculous questions that highlight the misconceptions about Native American people, or at least the way the people in the border towns see us. Unfortunately, some of these ideas are inspired by facts, loosely inspired anyways. Facts like that the IQ of Native Americans on average is 10 to 15 points lower than the national average for IQ in America. I understand that there are many factors that play a part in this, like standardized testing, because people learn in different ways, especially indigenous people. The way we process our knowledge as a society is different. But nevertheless, socializing in a society that views you this way can have an effect on your self-confidence and your opinion of yourself. It can discourage you. Another thing that troubles me about these stigmas is the effect that it has on indigenous people. It causes us to espouse a victim mentality. To give you a personal example, when I was younger, I was arrested. I broke the law. But at the time, when I was young, I was so convinced that I was arrested for being a minority or for being a Native American that I literally attributed being arrested to that fact, despite having broke the law. Yeah, that was obviously ridiculous, and I see the fault in that belief now. Another aspect of this mentality is kind of like the core of critical race theory. It's like the belief that if we can't achieve success, it's because of systemic racism and discrimination. People really believe that minorities are singled out and actively obstructed to be stopped from achieving financial success or success in your career. I don't believe that there's evidence to support that. I don't believe that that is a reality, but it does have a debilitating and detrimental effect on our children and our impressionable people. I am absolutely certain that if a person, especially a child, an impressionable child, believes that there is some sort of hidden force in society that is constantly and intentionally working against their success, that it will take the responsibility out of their hands. It'll make them feel like they've lost their autonomy, even if they don't know what that means. It'll remove self-agency from their mind. And I want my kids to take responsibility, and if they don't take responsibility or they don't have self-agency, they also won't take responsibility for their own success. They won't feel like they can determine their trajectory. And I feel like that's the most subversive factor of this phenomenon. And it also makes a person feel like they have enemies or opposing forces at every turn. It makes them feel like they have to surmount more than the average person in a capitalistic society. And that's why I'll teach my children that although the view of indigenous people is stigmatized, that we see ourselves as having equal opportunity in the world. We may not have equality of outcome with everybody else, but we have equal opportunity that they can achieve what they want. Now I want to get to the focus of my research, which is the rights of our people in the Pacific Northwest, especially the rights mentioned in the Point Elliott Treaty. I always believed that the political leaders or political figures or governmental figures within tribes, especially my tribe, who were like these freedom fighters or these, honorable, noble protesters, defenders of our people and our liberty and our rights and our treaties. Most indigenous people view our treaties as a major victory. They view it as the outcome of a war that we had with the ineluctable tsunami of colonists from the 17th century to present day. And that it all culminated in us maintaining our rights and our sovereignty in our respective reservations. Unfortunately, as some have known for a long time and I recently found out, this is not true. The very first article in the Treaty of Point Elliott was appalling. When I first read it this quarter, I was disgusted, not just with the wording, but with the misconceptions that our own people have regarding the treaty. We have worshipped this treaty as a gospel, that it chronicles our achievements. The very first article in the Treaty of Point Elliott states in no uncertain terms that all territories, all rights, all assets, all titles and interests shall be ceded and relinquished to the United States government. I was shocked. I was bewildered. I felt unmoored. The first article not only removes all of our assets and land, but it bestows a perpetual right to the United States that at any time they can establish a boarding school on our reservation. And boarding schools, as many of us know, were kind of like the primary mechanism of forced assimilation, of that brainwashing that displaced us further from our own culture. Next, I want to point out something that has called into question my identity as an enrolled Tulalip tribal member. All indigenous people take an existential pride in their identity as a Native American, but also in their specific identity as a member of their individual tribe. And I am no different. I've always held great pride in being a member of the Tulalip tribes. For a long time, I've known that the United States government labeled many tribes in the Pacific Northwest as members of the Tulalip tribes, but I always thought that was just to make it easier and simpler for them to categorize us, to kind of say, hey, this is the Tulalip tribes, the Pacific Northwest. I read in the Point Elliott Treaty that the reservation at Tulalip was known as the General Agency. That basically the General Agency was comprised of a bunch of small bands and groups of Indians from throughout the Pacific Northwest. Pretty much any Indians in the area, or any Indians that were present for the signing of the treaty other than the Lummi tribe, were all being sent to the Tulalip Reservation to the General Agency. This makes our identity as Tulalip tribal people kind of strange, because Tulalip was a designation that is founded upon the geographic prison we're forced to reside upon by the United States government. which is really a shame because many tribal people like to trace their lineage as far back as they can to reveal where their families came from. It is very difficult to do so when such a variety of tribal people were forced to one reservation. We were all forced in Tulalip to personify what the U.S. government wanted it to be, wanted it to mean to be, an enrolled Tulalip Indian. Unfortunately, this makes me feel like there is no such thing as the identity of a Tulalip Indian in the traditional sense. That act, that single act, has displaced so many of us from our ancestral lands, and the loss of knowledge since then may prevent us from ever discovering where many of us came from. I am extremely upset every time I speak about this, but I do believe that my people have maintained a good amount of knowledge while redefining what it means to be a Tulalip. The next article I want to speak about is Article 5. This is an article related to the fishing rights of our people. The first line in the article states that the Pacific Northwest Indians can take fish at usual and accustomed areas, but it says that we may do this in common with the citizens of America. And I feel like this is an affront to our people. I feel this way because it clearly explains that any American who decides to move into our territory and fish for a living can then be entitled to a percentage of the fisheries in the area. The article then says in a concise description that we may gather other foods of our culture such as berries, roots, game, shellfish, but only so long as the areas are found and have not been claimed by a citizen of the United States. Any areas that we find that have been claimed by a citizen of the United States, we can't have access to. This statement, or this act, is unjust. We get half of the fish and other nutritional resources, but we may only gather them as long as the land upon which they inhabit has not been staked or claimed by any common settler who decides to live there. This is completely unacceptable. This, as a law, does not prevent any settler from simply claiming the land which has access to fish or game or berries or roots, and thereby preventing us from gathering these foods, because some foods or fish can only be gathered in certain areas or certain elevations or certain types of forests. Fishing rights on my reservation and on most reservations in the Pacific Northwest were the primary source of food and income. To this day, many make a living fishing, and many use fish for sustenance, as long as it's in the season for fishing. I am told that the rights, whatever ones we have maintained, were crucially important to our ancestors who negotiated the Treaty of Point Elliott. I am told this because the ancestors knew we would struggle to hold on to our traditional and cultural knowledge, and that fishing was so woven into the fabric of our culture that as long as we preserved that right, our people would have the opportunity to learn the rest of our culture. I find this to be accurate and that act to be sagacious. My people specifically have an oral history known as the Salmon Village story. It's like our most revered story, and it contains a lot of lessons about our society, and it contains a lot of values that kind of point to how we should conduct ourselves. This is why I believe that the ancestors did a good job preserving what they could, and if there was any right that could be maintained to hold on to our identity and our culture, then fishing would probably be it. The recurring theme in this treaty is that the United States government or the President of the United States can at any time take away the rights discussed in the treaties. That includes our fishing rights, our land rights, because all the discussions in the treaty, every article, were followed by a reminder that the President of the United States government can remove those rights if it's beneficial to citizens of the U.S. I obviously find this to be appalling. I used to sit back with my wife when we would be watching a movie about Native Americans, or be watching a TV show or a documentary or whatever, and I would say, okay, well, there's a successful tribe out there like the Seneca, the Seminole, or like Tulalip. We're a pretty financially successful tribe at this point. So I would say, I wonder why our tribe doesn't just purchase the surrounding land that's off the reservation and then annex it into the tribe. I think it's called annexing. Annex it into the tribe to expand our borders a little bit. you know. Well, then I discovered in the Treaty of Point Elliott that anything that belongs to the tribe, if it's beneficial or necessary to improve the lives of the citizens of the United States, that they can come back and take it at any time. Um, yeah, well, I have an answer to that question now. All right, to finish, I'll highlight that in the treaty, it clearly states that from that point on, the tribes of the Pacific Northwest, or those present for the signing of the treaty, are thereby dependent on the United States government. Now, I'm not very well versed in tribal law or politics, but I do know that most tribal people consider themselves or their tribe to be sovereign, to be separate from the United States, to be a nation unto itself. Um, yeah, most tribes have nation at the end of their name. You know, they consider it to be an international border. You know, well, I'm not exactly sure how much the wording makes a difference, but this sounds a lot more like domestic dependence to me than actual sovereignty. But then again, I'm not exactly clear on the actual word for word definition of sovereignty, but yeah, something to think about.